Welcome everyone to a second lecture on Henri Bergson's Time and Free Will, and this time we're going to discuss duration a little bit. I'll link to the first lecture just below in the description of this video. So I begin with a few remarks by Bergson on Kant's transcendental aesthetic as we find it at the beginning of the Critique of Pure Reason. Bergson says the following: the theory of space in the transcendental aesthetic, quote, consists in endowing space with an existence independent of its content, in laying down as de jure separable what each of us separates de facto, and in refusing to regard extensity. Space here, Bergson insists, is an empty homogeneous medium. Because of its indifference towards its content, Kantian time is thus also reduced to space. The task must hence be not only to separate the two, but also to show neither space nor time are homogeneous media, because, as Bergson argues, quote, time conceived under the form of an unbounded and homogeneous medium is nothing but the ghost of space haunting the reflective consciousness. To conceive of such a homogeneous medium is already an abstraction too far removed from life. It is a kind of reaction against that heterogeneity which is the very ground of our experience. Bergson points out, the ground of our experience is the multiplicity of immeasurable impressions, is the unordered onslaught of beings or appearances. Now, Bergson, of course, comes at this from a completely different stance than I would, for example, read Kant. Now, Kant would not deny that space and time are, let's say, homogeneous. Maybe he would deny that they collapse into each other. But the reason why this is, while on some level this is a justified reading, however, I think it fails to see the purpose or the intention of Kant's first critique, which is to provide validity to formal logic, to bind formal logic again to appearance, but in an a priori sense. So time and space as forms of intuition are the necessary media, yes, by which the scientific subject considers appearances. Kant is not interested in general everyday experience, not at all. Pure duration thus takes place when, quote from Bergson, our ego lets itself live, when it refrains from separating its present state from its former state. Bergson uses the example of a piece of music to illustrate pure duration. The single notes of a melody are, quote, melting, so to speak, into one another, and therefore it is an organic whole when we remember them. The ego does not let itself entirely go. It unites in a non-linear way the presence with what has been, which allows the ego to endure. The ego does not regard its states as point along a straight line as if it were above these states, but it is itself deeply immersed in the immediate multiplicity of its impressions. It is too easy, as common sense would have it, to think of our temporal existence as successive. Kant made just that mistake, according to Bergson. We are naturally in the state of pure duration. Time, however, is where common sense resides, and for taking them both to be commonsensical receptacles, the ordinary concept of time is equivalent to space. In ordinary time, we confuse quality with quantity. Difference is then addressed in quantitative terms rather than in degrees of intensity or multiple interpenetrating levels of sensations, as Bergson would like to see. Time can be regarded as quantitative succession when it is reduced to space, for they both qua homogeneous, quantifiable media collapse into each other. This allows time to be measured just as we can measure the distance between A and B. And by the way, this is also the way in which Kant, through this focus on succession explicitly in the Transcendental Aesthetic, this is how he resolves a certain dialectic, or let's say contradiction, between the different time states of an object if it changes in between different moments along successive time. Duration is the antithesis of ordinary time. Duration, or durée, is not the self-moving number, arithmos kineos, as Aristotle describes it in the fourth book of his Physics, a number of motion in respect of before and after, to quote Aristotle. Here we account for time as according to the succession of before and after. Time is only perceived in motion, which amounts to a measurable succession. According to Heidegger, the understanding of time has remained largely the same throughout the history of philosophy. Even with duration, it could be argued, Bergson's duration that is, that this understanding of time is not reversed, or does not reverse entirely this collapse of space and time, since it remains in an antithetical position to arithmetic, successive time. It replaces the category quantity with quality, but remains dependent on quantitative succession insofar as the former is understandable only in relation to the latter. So that would be my criticism of Bergson. The arithmetic flux of now states is replaced with the heterogeneous interpenetrating multi-level enduring duration, where past states flow into present states or intersperse with them, eternally intermingling and changing. And now to come back to what I said in the first lecture, a certain Gratillonian unfreedom actually is here looming. But Bergson asserts that the successive time turns free activity into conscious automatism. But I would say that this could even be the case in his own understanding of time as durée, as endurance, even though there is a self-awareness of oneself as continuous through these interspersing, interpenetrating, multi-level duration. In pure duration, I can know the thing in itself entirely. I can immerse myself in the thing in itself, for there are no longer only isolated succeeding states, but I am an organic whole, or part of an organic whole. I am immediately within a world of things and sensations. There are not copies of appearances in my mind, as would be the case for Kantian apprehension of representation or of the manifold. I am open to the thing in itself, in its immeasurable vastness and multiplicity, for I am myself fundamentally ever-changing in all former states, feeding into the present. So here again, even though this may sound appealing, again, I think this is the Gratillonian moment that I just pointed to again. The multiplicity of myself, the ever changing self, that complete instability, and the the continuous flow of past states or moments into present states or moments could be seen as simply a reverse of successive time, and hence a genuinely Gratillonian moment insofar as not really anything can be named still. But we can see already how important then the work on being in time will be after Bergson for exactly also that reason. Now Miguel de Bestegui has argued the following: it is by multiplying images that we will be able to approximate the reality of duration. Now this is what Miguel sees in Bergson. The mistake, as Bergson would say, is to project time into space, because then we express duration in terms of extensity, and succession thus takes the form of a continuous line or a chain, the parts of which touch without penetrating one another. Now I'll read this quote again from Miguel de Bestegui. It is by multiplying images that we will be able to approximate the reality of duration. Now what does that remind you of? I'm sure that this is not Miguel's intention, but multiplying images is what we are confronted with in the burgeoning digital age. And we are but multiplying images. And perhaps that is an attempt to approximate, to use this language, the reality of duration. But that is not to say that we approximate actuality, or that we are at all capable of articulating the vast wholeness and of actuality. But instead we are just approximating through multiplying images a certain sense of duration, which again just also then collapses into heterogeneous, interpenetrating, multi-level, enduring duration. Which again, I wonder, how does that not lead to an unconscious automatism, to reverse what Bergson says? So this constant flux, right, into the presence of all preceding states raises the question not only as to whether Bergson has really overcome the Aristotelian paradigm, but also whether duration is not too close or to or derivative of the perfect presence of the nunc stans. The duration might be fulfilled with the internet, a multiplicity of all-encompassing, perfectly past incorporating spaceless presence. Bergson, this is important, the internet is spaceless. It's also to a certain degree timeless, but it is in fact really de-spaced. And it is perhaps what Bergson describes with duration, with durée, is in fact the internet. Bergson himself is closer to the nunc stans in his example of dreaming. For in sleep, as he says, we no longer measure duration, but we feel it. From quantity, it returns to the state of quality. We no longer estimate past time mathematically. Thank you very much.